I'm never gonna stop being trans. A letter and a passport can't change that.
Girl, I think you need to worry less about the gender marker on your passport and more about the gender marker in your pamper. And maybe more importantly, why you're wearing a pamper in the first place. How long have you been living as a trans woman that you can't get a better tuck than that? I mean, talk about the battle of the bulge. And what shoe size are you wearing in that picture anyway? Is that a size 130 in women's? Because my, what big feet you have, Grandma. And I know somebody in the comments is going to be like, well, maybe she wanted to be comfortable, Ty. If she wanted to be comfortable, she would have continued dressing as a male. Because if you think being a woman is about comfort, you clearly have not studied the subject enough. So between that bulging sheeness and those snowshoes that you had shaped into heels, I would say that the M on your passport is the least of your worries when it comes to barriers to giving off the illusion of femininity. What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. All right, you guys, so this is another one that I originally wasn't going to talk about, but when you show up to Milan Fashion Week wearing a pamper by Prada, I feel like I have a duty and a responsibility. And I know some of you are going to be like, but Ty, that was high fashion. To which my question would be, yeah, but what were they high on? Because I can't imagine anybody thinking that a trans woman untucked in a Prada pull-up was going to be a hit with the fashion community. And maybe it really is. Maybe I'm on a loop. Maybe I don't understand Gen Z. But I never thought a trans woman in a nappy, as our friends in the UK would put it, would be considered fashion. But anyway, seeing that picture of her at Milan Fashion Week made my mind go back to her passport video because it bothered me at the time, but I couldn't quite figure out why it bothered me so much because I saw the full version of it. A lot of people have only seen like a 2-minute version of it. And upon watching it again, I was like, okay, I figured out what bothered me. And I'll share that with you guys when we get to it. But for now, let's get into this video.
Hello, internet. I don't really post much these days, but I had a bit of a harsh reality check today.
Now, when I first heard harsh reality, I felt like somebody got hit with a dose of the truth.
And felt like it's important to share with whoever is listening.
In all likelihood not, but keep going.
So I'm sure most of us remember on, I think, the first day of Trump's presidency, he signed an executive order to declare only 2 genders recognized by the state, male and female, assigned at birth.
Okay, but we all already knew this, so any kind of surprise after that is unwarranted, and I'm not really sure why you felt the need to vent.
As a result of this, which I wrote down because I want to get it right, the Bureau of Consular Affairs has frozen passport applications requesting a gender marker change or renewals or new applications with a gender marker differing from an applicant's gender assigned at birth.
Okay, now I'm only stopping here because I think it's ridiculous that anybody had to sign an executive order stating that, because we've all always known that there's only been male and female or man and woman. But apparently Biden had gotten carried away enough that he was letting people use X gender markers. So that's where things started to go off the rails, if you really need help figuring out how we got to this point.
So my initial reaction to this, because our president, is a lot of talk, was like, I'll believe it when I see it.
Okay, speaking of a lot of talk, I don't know if it was your parents or your friends that led you to believe that you were actually this interesting, but we are only like a minute into you having this one-sided conversation, and I really don't know what all the extra words are about. Really, if you ask me, this video could have been as short as, I went to get my passport the other day. The sex on my passport had been restored to the actual truth rather than the fantasy of a gender I've been living under for the last couple of years, and I'm not happy about that. That's how short this could have been. It really didn't have to be a whole, okay, I don't usually text, and why do you look like a woman but talk like a bro? I'm mean, like, who taught you to speak? How about you remember that you're an actor and not a writer and move this along? But to respond to what you said about President Donald Trump being all talk, technically, President Donald Trump has never been all talk. Like in the first administration, the problem was that everybody, including the general public and a lot of the government, was completely against him. So they kept jamming up everything that he wanted to do. But in this second administration, thanks to the trans community, or I should say the trans activists and people like yourself, the general public has gotten fed up. So now not only is the general public allowing him to do the things that he wants to do, they're actually happy that he's doing it. Now let's get back to you hemming and hawing through this statement that you prepared just to make yourself feel better about all of it.
And today, I saw it on my new passport mail. So,
if by it you mean the fact that you're male, not to be crass, but you see it every day in the shower. You see it every time you go to the bathroom. So I'm not sure how the sex, not gender, marker on your passport felt like some sort of sobering reminder.
Now to specify, my gender markers were first changed in my teens when I first got my driver's license, and then passports following. All have been female since then. Hasn't really been a problem. However, last year when I was filming in Barcelona, our car got broken into and my bag got stolen, and inside of that was my passport, which was supposed to last me up until my 30s. And so I got an emergency passport, which was very simple at the time. It's basically just a copy of my old passport, but temporary and only supposed to be used within the year. So as soon as I got back to the States, I had to get this fixed and get it replaced with a real proper passport, which I went to the Federal Passport Agency today in LA and did.
Okay, I'm gonna stop right here because to be 100% honest, I feel like you're lying. If you say that this happened last year when you were working in Barcelona and we are now in February, and you also say that you went to get your passport renewed as soon as you got back to the United States, are you telling me that you were in Barcelona working from last year until February? Because that's when this happened. Because I really don't think that's the case. I really don't think that she's been in Barcelona from last year until just last week, February. I personally think you were lazy about it, like all of us, and you thought Trump either wouldn't be able to do it or wouldn't do it to you because you're a celebrity that a lot of us have never heard of until now. But nonetheless, you're a celebrity, and so the rules wouldn't apply to you. So when you finally got off your lazy ass to get your passport and it came back with an M on it, you were like, okay, I'll milk this for publicity and pretend this is all about trans rights and trans visibility, when really it's just you whining into your phone for a little while.
I've had to do this one time before. No part of the process was different. I filled everything out just like I normally would. I put female, and when it was picked up today and I opened it up, they had changed the marker to male.
Okay, obviously I've seen a couple of these videos so far as different trans people talking about this, and I am so tired of you guys saying that they changed it to male. They did not change it to male. They corrected it to male. You now have a passport that has your accurate information on it. No matter what you do to yourself, you will always be male. Yes, you can present as a woman. You can try your best to look like a woman, but you will still be male. So when there is a sex marker involved, what they are talking about is biological sex, and you are biologically male. I don't know how or why anybody let it be considered a gender marker when it's not a gender marker. It is meant to be a sex marker. So they did not change it from female to male. They corrected it from female, which was not accurate information, to male, which is accurate information. You may not like that, but that's what it actually is. Now continue to get to your non-point, which I'm going to make a point out of.
I'm not making this post to fearmonger or to create like drama or receive consolation. I don't need it, but I do think it's worth posting to sort of note the reality of the situation and that it is actually happening. And I was shocked. Because I don't know. I just didn't think it was actually going to happen.
No, like I already said, what you didn't think is that it was going to happen to you. But just so you don't have to suffer anymore in the future, let me help you out just a little bit more. Santa Claus is not real. Grass is green, the sky is blue, and water is wet. Hopefully some of those simple truths I just shared with you will help prevent you from having to be shocked in the future. I'm glad we had this talk.
And like, I want to acknowledge my privilege, like not only as a like famous or like celebrity trans woman who is white and thin and can adhere to like contemporary beauty standards, and I can participate in all of that, and I pass, and it still happened.
Okay, and this was one of the main parts that I wanted to get to, because you are right. All of those things did used to matter. All of those things really did used to help a trans person like yourself out. I don't really know how much being white used to help. When I was younger, being white wasn't really a factor when it came to being trans, as far as white privilege applying to that in any kind of meaningful way. Where the privilege really used to be when I was younger was in being Asian or Native American, because of the bone structure, and when it comes to Asian, the size, and also the lack of facial and body hair. It really did used to help those two groups out as far as presenting more as female and being more passable. That's where the privilege was, if there was any privilege when it came to ethnicity and being trans when I was younger. But what I really wanted to get to is, you're right, the fact that you're a celebrity and that you can adhere to beauty standards because you are a good looking girl, you are a pretty trans woman. All of that really did used to help out. But for the sake of argument, let's take all of the factors that you mentioned into account. The fact that you're white, the fact that you're thin, the fact that you're pretty, the fact that you're passable. Let's take all of that into account and remember that all of that did really used to help out. All of that really did used to matter when it came to the way society dealt with trans people. And then let's remember that this is how bad the activists have messed it up, that none of that matters anymore. And now you and every other trans person like you that has actually put some thought into their look and their execution has been excluded from all of those benefits with every other male. And I will repeat, you have the trans activists to thank for that and not anybody else.
Yeah, I never had my birth certificate changed. So this has led me to believe that I think the agencies who are in charge of passports and this sort of thing are now required to cross-reference birth certificates, or I don't know.
Okay, so right there, you're admitting you dropped the ball again. When you had a chance to change your birth certificate, you chose not to do that. And now that's coming back to bite you in the ass, because once they cross-reference, then they realize that you were actually born male, and that's what they have to go with. So really, if you ask me, it sounds like this is all on you, no matter how we slice it.
Exactly what, or what changed as far as the processing goes, but This is the first time, excuse me, this has happened to me since I changed my gender marker. We're coming up on a decade now or something. And I do believe it is a direct result of the administration our country is currently operating under.
Really, genius? You think this is a result of the administration that we're operating under? Thank God you're not a detective, because this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. The president signed an executive order on this. It's one of the things he campaigned about. He talked about it during his inauguration speech. When he signed the executive order, there were cameras around. So of course this is a direct result of the administration that we're operating under. This is exactly the same as what I said about the last person that did one of these videos and I reacted to it. Looks like a woman, still dumb like a man.
And I guess I'm just sort of scared of the way this stuff like slowly gets implemented. Because things just sort of like start happening. I think as we've seen in like historical rises of fascism and this sort of, everything that this new administration kind of represents.
Can somebody send this person to some media training? Can somebody teach this person to actually speak? You know, it's bad when I notice, because this is horrible right now. Trying to listen to this person sputter out a sentence is pissing me off more than you'll understand. But let's get to what she's actually saying. I'm so tired of these people bringing fascism into it. And I'm so tired of it that I decided to, while I was doing research for this video, go through the tenets of fascism just to see what she was talking about or how this applied. And honestly, adherence to biological reality or acknowledging biological reality is not anywhere on the list of what fascism entails. I checked out the original 14 tenets of fascism. I also checked out the revisions, and nowhere did I see proper gender markers and acknowledging biological sex listed. So I'm not sure what sign of the apocalypse you think this is, but I'm not seeing it. Before we go any further, I just want to ask that you like, comment, and subscribe. We're on our way to 100,000 subscribers. We just passed 72,000 the other day. Thank you guys very much. When you hit the subscribe button, make sure that you also click the bell and set it to all notifications so that you know every time I upload. Now let's get back to this ridiculousness.
There's a lot of talk and then things start happening. And we start to normalize the circumstances we're under. And I just feel like it's important to share that it's not just talk.
Remember a few minutes ago when you said that you weren't trying to fear-monger? Well, I hate to break it to you, but you're fear-mongering.
This is real, and it's happening. And no one, no matter their circumstance, no matter how wealthy or white or pretty or whatever, is excluded.
Okay, you've mentioned that more than once, and that's what I really wanted to get to and what really bothers me about this video you made. Why don't you just admit that that's really what bothers you? Why don't you stop trying to make it sound like it's about fascism or any of the other stuff that you're trying to make it out to be, and just admit that you don't think that this should be happening because you're pretty and you're famous and you're white, because you've mentioned white more than once. So that leads me to believe that you really think that all of these factors, including the fact that you're white, which I don't think should be a major factor in anything, honestly, but I can tell by the stuff that you're saying that it really bothers you that this happened to you as a pretty, thin, white person. This is not supposed to happen to you. This is not your life. You didn't become a celebrity for this. And I get it. If that's the way you feel about it, that's the way you feel about it. But stop trying to make it seem like it's trying to fight fascism, or you're trying to show trans visibility, or you're standing up for trans rights, just admit that you honestly thought that with that combination and the fact that you're a celebrity and living a celebrity lifestyle and get treated special everywhere you go, you thought this was going to be another one of those instances, and it turned out not to be, and that really bothers you, and you're having trouble wrapping your mind around it, and I get it. Also, though, while you're at it, remember that if you were to talk about who's really responsible for all of this, you would not be popular and people would not like you. Actually, if people would pay attention to you and not just the surface and think, oh, she's standing up for us. If they would really pay attention to you like I have, they would understand that this is you being very selfish. This is you thinking that you were going to have it better than everybody else because of the factors that you keep on listing. But if we're really to talk about who it is that's responsible for this, you don't have to blame the Trump administration. Who you really want to blame is the trans activists, because for years and years and years, this has not been a thing. I have had trans friends for the last 30 years. I bring it up because it does actually matter. When I was younger, people would get their gender markers, sex markers, changed all the time, and it was never a big deal. But the difference was, when I was younger, the trans community was big on self-policing. Everybody understood that these were not rights that they had. Access to particular spaces and being able to change their sex markers on their IDs were not considered rights as far as they went. They knew that they were privileges. So what they would do is they would let the newer trans people know, maybe the ones that needed to work on their look or weren't passable in any way, they would let them know, hey, these spaces aren't for you. You're not ready for the women's bathroom yet. You're still a man. You go to the men's bathroom. And I know some people are going to get like, there'll always be a man. I've already said that. They will always be male, and there is no changing that. I 100% get that. But what I'm saying is, when people were passable, they would have access to certain spaces. And the goal was not to stand out in any way. The goal was to pass or have nobody even think about it. Just not give it a second thought. You look like a woman. Nobody questions anything. You use whatever spaces you have to use. Nobody cares. When it came to being in a woman's locker room, no trans person in my generation or before would ever put themselves in a women's locker room where they actually had to be nude because they didn't want to show that part of themselves to anybody, especially not women. It wasn't that kind of situation at all. It was hard to be trans out in the world when I was younger, and because of that, there were a lot less people pretending to be trans. There were a lot less of the AGPs running around forcing their fetish on everybody. And there was no non-binary or anything we recognized as being non-binary that would occasionally decide to say that they were a woman on that day, or that those were the facilities that they were more comfortable using. Trans people were actually tough on other trans people because they wanted to be able to protect these privileges, and they didn't want to catch any heat from society in general. And it wasn't just about tough, it was also about love. Like if a girl, say, didn't know what to do with her hair or how to wear a wig in a way that it didn't look like a wig. This was something that the more advanced trans people would help the newer, less passable struggle queens with and give them tips when it came to makeup. A lot of trans people used to wear Dermablend when I was younger, because Dermablend is a really heavy makeup that was originally formulated for burn victims and people that had scars. So it was really thick, and it was really good at covering up any kind of 5 o'clock shadow you may have if you were still saving up the money for electrolysis or in between electrolysis appointments, because if you don't know how electrolysis works, you have to let the hair grow out somewhat so they're able to catch it the way that they need to do in order to pull it out and do the process. And it also works in cycles. Neither here nor there, but just making the point that this was something that the older girls or the more advanced girls would hand down to the less advanced girls. I mentioned the shoes at the beginning. That was another thing. When I was younger, every trans woman I know had the most gnarled feet because they had always been squeezing them into shoes that were several sizes too small, because big feet are a sign you're a man. And like I said, the goal was to be passable. The goal was not to be noticed. So they didn't want to wear men's sizes or men's size shoes because having big feet was a sign that you're a man. Or another example would be hips. A lot of times men don't have hips. Okay, we've all seen a guy or two that had some true birthing hips, but for the most part, men don't have hips. So what the trans women used to do was take old couch cushions and they would take a razor blade and they would shape them so that they would be hip pads, so that they would give the silhouette of a woman. This was also something that they would hand down to the younger queens. And these were all things that trans women knew that they had to pay attention to, because in order to be passable, they had to work extra hard. Like comedian Lunel used to have a really good joke about this that I'm sure that she can't do anymore because of political correctness. But she used to say in the joke that if you ever see a woman that is 100% perfect, you know that's a man, because real women don't have time for all that, which really does make sense when you come from the generation that I come from. So now you guys, no pun intended, have dropped the bar and allow anybody to look like anything and identify as trans and tell them that they're beautiful and tell them that they're doing great. And that's just not realistic. It's not believable. And it's part of the reason that you're in the situation that you're in right now, because trans activists really did try to push that and women got uncomfortable with it. Women were like, okay, I'm not comfortable with the person that fully looks like a man in this women's bathroom right now. The only reason they were comfortable with it before was because they didn't actually know, and it didn't raise any flags, because people were actually making an effort to be passable, and in a lot of cases would achieve enough passability in order to be able to access these spaces without raising any flags. And then the trans community started to employ a real bring all your friends type of situation into women's spaces, and then that's where we got to the point where trans people wanted to be in women's sports and trans people wanted to say that women were women. And at first there were a lot of women that went along with that too, and they were like, you're right, trans women are women, you deserve to be treated like any other woman. And then trans people took it a step further and started saying that if straight men didn't have an interest in dating trans women, then they must be transphobic. And that's where people started to draw a line and were like, okay, that's not right. You can't tell these men that if they don't want to date you or they don't find you attractive, that means they're transphobic. These men are allowed to not be attracted to you if they're just not attracted to you. But still, some people were with the trans community and being like, yeah, you should at least lie to us and say that you're open to it, even if you're not open to it. So we moved on from that. And then trans people were like, all right, well, I don't want to be considered any different than any other woman, so I just want to be called a woman. I don't want to be called a trans woman. And some people were like, okay, that's cool. And then trans people said, you know what? I don't like the fact that you're called a woman and there's no prefix to it. You should be a cis woman. And then women were like, oh, okay, well, how is it that you went from being a trans woman to just being a woman, and now I've got to be a cis woman because apparently you are now the default woman? And that's where everybody started to screech their brakes. And then trans people started wanting to be in sports. So then once that happened, there was the risk of women getting hurt, and there was also women losing opportunities to male athletes that were competing in female sports. So there had to be something done about that. And in the meantime, that's when they started trying to push that women could no longer be called women in certain instances and need to be called birthing people. At one point, I was at an LGBT center where they referred to women as vagina carrying bodies. That is no lie, and something I personally witnessed and was like, wow, this has really gotten out of control. So with everything combined, that's when people started looking for some actual solutions as far as how to deal with this, as far as how to safeguard women and society in general because the trans community had gotten so out of control. And it was also during this time that people really started trying to push the children should be allowed to transition and that minors should be able to start taking hormone blockers at the very least, which were supposedly a pause button, but that's not the way hormone blockers work. Or that minors should be able to fully get on cross-sex hormones and start to get surgeries. And then there were trans people in women's prisons, and then there were trans people wanting access to women's rape shelters and women's domestic violence shelters. And then it all just got so carried away that we needed some sort of solution for it. So then Donald Trump comes along, and his anti-trans ads were some of the most popular and really did help him go up in the polls. And that was undeniable. And it was one of the things that he really did push during his campaign. And it was because people actually wanted it. People actually did think that the trans community had gotten too carried away. So now this is where we find ourselves, and it was because of the trans community. And at a point I was talking about this on a previous video and the way that this was going to go down, and I wasn't sure how exactly they were going to be able to enforce it, because for so long I had just taken it for granted that trans people had access to these spaces. I didn't realize that President Trump would sign an executive order just saying that you have to go by what is your biological sex, which even though it hadn't occurred to me, because like I said, I had been used to things being this way for so long, it really did make sense. And it's something that one of my subscribers here on YouTube had actually mentioned in a comment before, where I was talking about this in particular, like I said, before Trump was in office, and they were saying, okay, well, there's really no way to regulate what's passable and what's not passable. So what they're probably going to have to do is go back to what your actual biological sex is, or at least what your ID says, which I was like, okay, well, I know enough trans people that have had their IDs changed to reflect what it is they present as rather than what they were born as or what it is they've been living as for the last 30 years or however many years of their life they've been living as the person that they are today. So President Trump was like, I'll do you one better and we'll take it all the way back to the way that you're born, so there's no confusion and there's no argument. And the only reason there was any confusion and any argument was because, like I said, the trans activists had gotten too carried away. So really, when it comes down to it, rather than blaming the Trump administration, what I think people like you should do, people that do have a voice, people that do have a platform, people that do have some actual celebrity, I think what people like yourself should do is be like, hey, you guys, maybe let's get back to respecting the general public. Maybe let's get back to not allowing every person that wants to say that they're a woman to identify as trans and actually put up some guardrails and actually do a little bit of gatekeeping for our own survival. But you'll never do that because that would not make you popular with the people that you think are on your side and that think that you're on their side. But really, after listening to you, I honestly do realize that you are on your own side, and you do think that because, in your words, because you're white, because you're pretty, because you're thin, because you're a celebrity, that none of this should be happening to you, and the trans community is just a smokescreen. So really, you're using them just like they're using you, and you all deserve each other. Sorry to go on the tangent, but this was the part that I really did want to get to in this video, because although this person makes it seem like they're being altruistic and selfless and really just looking out for the community, they're not. They're just mad that it happened to them. Anyway, that's where I'm at on all of this. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. If you want to see a video on the trans slasher, aka Jaya Cruz, and some of the stuff I figured out by doing research on that particular topic, click the video on your screen. Other than that, as always, thank you for watching. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.
They bought into his bullshit.